Chair. Ozfilm, did you have a brief opening statement that you wish to give?
Yes, we do, Chair.
Yep, go ahead, thanks.
So thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss Parts 1 and 2 of Schedule 6 of the bill, which Ozfilm supports. Ozfilm is a unique organisation that partners government and industry. We promote Australia and attract international production and post-production to our shores. Our members include government screen agencies and Australian screen businesses working across the sector. You may have seen a number of them made submissions also. Schedule 6 raises the location offset to 30%, and we greatly welcome this reform. The current rebate of 16.5% has required additional grants, including the Location Incentive Program, to be effective. A 30% offset will be more competitive and provide certainty. It will bring a robust pipeline of large projects, driving foreign investment and supporting local jobs and businesses. Importantly, the location offset builds Australia's capabilities, and this benefits local stories. We do support the eligibility requirements in the bill. We know the training contributions, for example, can make a real difference. When Marvel made Shang-Chi and Thor here, they engaged 32 trainees from local education providers and non-profits, and we can describe how many of these individuals in that program have worked ever since. These opportunities aren't isolated. Anyone But You shot in Sydney, but engaged trainees from Tasmania. And the training will target shortages identified by industry and work with local organisations. Once passed, this reform will bring immediate benefits for workers and businesses. There are benefits you might expect, such as to post-production companies and equipment suppliers in large cities, but the offset also benefits the regions. For example, a visual effects company in Ballina and small businesses like cafes in the Whitsundays when Ticket to Paradise shot there. But time is a factor. Several productions are waiting for the certainty that these reforms will provide. As they were announced in the 2023 budget, there is an expectation within the industry that they will be passed by June 30. A delay would create uncertainty for Australian businesses and international investors, and without that certainty, these projects may go elsewhere. So in conclusion, we support Parts 1 and 2 of the schedule in their current form and ask the Senate to pass them in the next sitting period. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Marks. Mr Dina or Ms Vieira, did you have an opening statement?
Yes, if it's okay, I'll just make a short statement and then hand to Ms Vieira. I wanted to start by acknowledging country on Gadigal land, and I recognise and acknowledge the many thousands of years of Indigenous storytelling and many parts of our screen industry are very valued parts of our Indigenous community as well. We've provided a written opening statement to the committee to assist in the inquiry. I just wanted to highlight a couple of points. We really do welcome the measures in this bill, particularly the new training obligations that Ms Marks has identified, and the attachment to the location offset, and the permanent increase to the rebate of 30%. We do make the point by strengthening our support for international work, we need to make sure that this has a known impact and a thoughtful impact on the overall industry. And there has been, in the absence of any government legislation yet for a commensurate regulation on mostly global streaming businesses to invest in some minimum levels of Australian screen stories, we are continuing to build a trend in screen production which is seeing the erosion of cultural sovereignty and exacerbating our increased dependence on international work. And that is mostly originating from one country. And I believe in getting the balance right for the future of our industry is pretty critical, and therefore we need to act urgently on the other parts of what the government is looking at. So we need to ensure that one is balanced by the other and not put all our eggs in one basket. We are gained and attracted at work here in Australia because of our reputation for quality crew, technical know-how, and a strong screen-friendly culture and financial support. But the independence and growing Australian industry you need to ensure exists so that international work can feed off that and vice versa. There is a particular measure in this bill that's problematic for some of SPA's members regarding the increased threshold for access to the location offset going from 15 million to 20 million. SPA Council President, Chief Content Officer for Emmy and BAFTA award-winning film and television company Hoodlum is here to address that issue. Thank you. Tracey.
Okay, great. So yes, I'm a film and television producer at Hoodlum Entertainment, as well as being president of Screen Producers Australia. And prior to this, I was actually the CEO of Screen Queensland, and I also ran Ozfilm's Los Angeles office for 10 years, in which time my role was to help secure billions of dollars in production for Australia. And I also chair Griffith's Film School, which is a huge training ground for the film industry. So Hoodlum is a small business in Queensland. We've been operating for 26 years. We make series such as In Our Blood, which was for the ABC. We did 4 seasons of a beautiful show called 5 Bedrooms for Channel 10 and Paramount Plus. We did 3 seasons of a show for Harrow for the ABC, and we made the first original Netflix show, Tidelands, which was the first Australian show that wasn't an acquisition. And as a small business who have been making Australian stories for global audiences, we're really proud of the producers, writers and directors that really started their careers in our company. We've trained not only creatives, but we've trained hundreds of crew across our productions, many who had their first job in this industry working on one of our shows. Many of those people are now heads of production on the huge international productions that are coming to Australia. And I think that this is an important point that I want to make today. Local Australian production companies are the starting point for almost all crew. We are their first job. And it's with that experience that they go on to build their resumes and that they're hired then on the US productions that are coming here looking for the best people, as they should. And whilst we're a small business with a core team of 10, we scale up and often have 500 people working for us. So recently on a production, we worked on a feature film called A Perfect Pairing, which went globally #1 on Netflix. And our most recent production, Land of Bad, which starred Liam Hemsworth and Russell Crowe, was released theatrically in the USA and created incredible opportunities for us as a business. We provided production services on this film, which means we come on board a US film to set up the production, hire the crew, do the training, manage the budget, and look after all of their deliverables. We essentially are providing a producing service without having the intellectual property or the ability to earn upside if the film does well. The screen business, as I'm sure you're all aware, is in constant change. Not only do we have the change in audiences because of streaming, but the strikes in the US affected not only American productions, but productions all over the world and caused many local businesses hardship, including ours. So whilst we wait for streaming regulation, doing production service work has been a huge opportunity and a lifesaver, not just for our business, but other producing businesses that have typically been Australian production companies. And it's why I want to support what Matt has said and raise one suggestion in relation to the new location offset legislation. First and foremost, we absolutely support the 30%. It is excellent and you have our wholehearted support because offshore projects are very much part of the ecosystem and bring significant new money into the economy. They drive the investment into equipment, visual effects, infrastructure and technology. But the decision to increase the threshold from 15 to 20 is going to have a negative unintended consequence on businesses like ours that have been able to do the service work. Firstly, the US big studio films don't need companies like ours. They have their US executives and they hire the best local crews. But the small, independent offshore films that utilise Australian companies to do this service work operate in the budget area of $15 to $17 million. This is important for us and it's become critical to our business. It helps us have a sustainable businesses between the peaks and troughs of Australian content, but it's also opened the doors for businesses like ours to take our Australian films globally through the relationships we've developed in those production service jobs. The threshold increase also doesn't consider what happens when the Australian dollar gets stronger. It will become harder to achieve, particularly for those independent films. We urge you to consider maintaining the current threshold in consideration of how this piece of legislation for offshore projects can continue to bring benefits to local businesses in ways that will help us have sustainable businesses.
Thank you very much, Ms Vieira and Mr Diener. Senator Hanson-Young, I'll go straight to you for some questions. Just while you find your mute button. Just while you're doing that, Senator Hanson-Young, I might just start with a question for Ozfilm. You talked about wanting the bill to be passed without delay to give certainty to productions that, are looking with interest at the improvement to the location offset from 16.5% to 30%. What are the types of productions, I guess, that are looking to see this change happen? And what sorts of productions do you think we'll see made in Australia if we can get this legislation passed?
Thank you, Chair. That is correct in terms of the timing. That's really critical for many screen businesses and crew, and also those internationally looking to invest in Australia. But any uncertainty always provides a level of risk for those looking to invest. So we're very keen to see the legislation, which has really broad support, as you've heard today, but also through the submission. So there is a range of projects that is looking at Australia currently and into the future. And what we really want to see is that diversity of types of productions coming in. So yes, there's the big tentpole projects, but there's also ones, in that sort of 20 to 50 million mark. So at the moment, there are a number of productions that are very cautiously moving forward on the assumption that the location offset will be legislated very shortly. So that has been great to see. So one was recently announced just for Victoria that I think has a spend, in the mid-50s million Australian dollars. So there's a real diversity, but there's about 4 projects that are really in early stages of pre-production at the moment that we know of here and are looking to move forward. But there are a range of other productions that are not yet confirmed or committed to Australia that are very much watching and waiting daily to see how this legislation progresses.
Yeah, thank you. And that $50 million ish production that you mentioned from Victoria, I'm not sure whether you can tell us what that is, but also is there a flow-on effect, I guess, to the industry locally more broadly? And can you tell us about that flow-on effect as well? Yes,
thank you. It's a great question. That particular project, the Victorian Government did announce it's an untitled feature film at the moment from Sony Pictures in the US, and they're expecting to employ 750 Australians on that production. So that's a very clear benefit in terms of direct employment. So all these productions, regardless really of their budget level, can employ, as Ms Vieira said before, she could employ 500 people. So they could go, a smaller project maybe 300 people, but the large productions may go up to 1,000 Australians on these productions. So direct job benefits and the certainty that the location offset will provide. And what's really critical about this change is that it goes from a merit-assessed grant program to an ongoing certain location offset. And what that does in terms of long-term benefits is really provides Australian workers with that certainty that they can have ongoing careers and that they can go from one job to another. And the same can be said for Australian businesses. So we represent 53 corporate businesses that all work on these local productions, and what they need is that certainty that they have a job now, but the work will continue into the future, because what that enables them to do is then reinvest in their business. So they can reinvest in their people, and they can provide training opportunities for their full-time staff often in these businesses, but they can also reinvest in technology. They can spend time on R&D, new equipment. So the benefits to the industry in terms of direct benefits from these productions are particularly the training that we've talked about, and there is a genuine commitment, we know, from international investors to partner with Australia, to partner with Australian education institutions and non-profits, and work with government and industry to really deliver meaningful training opportunities. And I think that's a real benefit of this legislation, that it makes it very clear what the requirements are for investors, and it provides opportunities for Australian education providers and other organisations to partner to deliver that training. So we've also seen, as I think Tracey mentioned earlier, a lot of opportunities for Australian creatives on these projects as well, with the increase particularly in television production that's come through the location incentive over the last 5 years. We've seen a number of these television shows engage Australian directors and some writers and often producers. So the benefits really are broad. As my opening statement said, they're not just also in the cities where we think that productions might most often happen, but the benefits do reach into the regions. A lot of these recent productions have maybe been based at a studio facility in one of the metro areas, but have shot on location, whether it's in southern New South Wales for Planet of the Apes or in far north Queensland. So those benefits really do stretch across the country as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Senator Hanson-Young.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for the being stuck on mute. Thank you all for appearing today in a hearing about a bill that has all these other things that are not in relation to your issue, but important nonetheless. I'm interested in two things. Obviously, this is a way of investing in the screen sector, linking to international films, skills training that we've heard about, but there's also a missing element in this policy plank, and that is where the commitment from the government is on the screen quotas and making sure we've got local content actually being made, Australian local content being made, not just stuff from overseas, so that we're telling our own stories. I'm interested as to your response to that. We were promised to have this legislation 18 months ago, and it seems very clear that the government is about to break that promise because the legislation hasn't even been tabled in the Parliament yet. We've got this piece, but not the next piece. So perhaps from a very practical perspective, Tracey, be keen to hear from you, but also from an industry-wide, be keen to hear from others. I'll let you answer that, and then I'll go on to my next lot of questions. Sure. I think, yes, we share concerns that we don't have any sight at the moment of when the streaming regulation is going to move forward. And it is somewhat frustrating because it does feel like we're in a holding pattern. The reason I have mentioned the threshold issue around the location offset is one of the great benefits for us as a company is the relationships it has allowed us to establish through doing production services to actually take our global stories, our Australian stories global by then taking our feature films and being able to sell them in the international market. One of the reasons we're so focused on feature films is because we don't know what's happening in the television space. The changes around free-to-air services and the amount of content that has, or the quotas, been removed during COVID has meant there's been a real drop-off in terms of that content, and now audiences are watching content on streaming, but with no obligation to make Australian content. It does feel we're in a holding pattern in terms of things going into production, and so we're very keen to see that be tabled and start moving forward as well.
Thank you. Anybody else?
If I just can add that, I mean, we surveyed our members because of not only have there been global reports about commissioning downturns and the risks that creates in the absence of us having a strong regulation piece, I wanted to ask our members, and we found that 80% of them that responded, and there was sort of over 100 or so responses to the survey, that was an 80% fall from the previous year because of a number of factors, but the absence of having this now moving forward, and again, as Tracey mentioned, the absence of regulation on commercial television is leaving us with a big gap. And while there's the occasional announcement of a project that is launching, it's usually there's a sort of an 18 months to 2 to 3 year lag in the development cycle. So a lot of our businesses are now sitting on lots of development, but haven't actually had any of that project work gone into production, and that will appear in the stats and the challenges going forward. So it is really difficult at the moment without seeing and having anything presented. And I'll make the point that Canada just announced their stage one of their plan, which is a 5% investment quota based on those streaming services earnings, and that's not even into Canadian content that they will then have to do probably up to 20% going forward. It's a investment into the overall system for Indigenous content and news. So again, the problem, and my point is that we've got to look at our system as a whole. We absolutely support this measure, but there is a yin and yang to all of our industry work, and that the domestic Australian work is the foundational piece of why we have a sector, why we have all of these measures, training programs, all of these things, is to build out Australian stories as a starting piece. And all the other things can't hang off it unless we have this base that is missing at the moment in terms of regulation. So it's really, really critical.
Yeah, okay. I can see that. I mean, ideally, these two things would have been, rather than being locked in a bill that has nothing to do with it, it could have been, put alongside the commitments that the government had already made in relation to Australian stories and local content. I'm interested in the point that you make around the change of the threshold, specifically given we're about to see the government break the promise on this other stuff. What is the justification for lifting it to 20 million rather than leaving it where it is, which seems to me a reasonable level for independent films?
I can just jump in. Sorry, Matthew.
Yeah, no, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, in terms of the justification, I think it's probably a matter for government in terms of where they got to in coming up with that. I would just say, it hasn't been raised directly with us as an issue from our members. I do note what screen producers have said, but I just want to make sure, that I put that on the record. It hasn't been raised. And to my point earlier about the importance of that diversity of productions, I really do think that is important. And from the productions, the majority of productions that we're looking at and the conversations that we're having out of the US do still fall between that 20 and above level. There's a majority of the work there. So I think even with raising the threshold, if that's the way that it goes forward, we still do provide that diversity of productions, which is really important, particularly because it also provides opportunities to open up the country. And I think that's critical with the location offset. What we've seen traditionally, as we know, is that the majority of productions have probably been based on the East Coast. And what we want to see when there's that certainty and consistency provided by the offset is that we'll see productions open up for places such as Western Australia and South Australia and others. And that was really important for us when we were thinking about that threshold. Will we still see those opportunities? And I do believe we will. We've seen South Australia, the first location offset project, I think it was, that they attracted was The Tourist, and that's at around 25 million QAPE, I believe. And also the conversations we're very much having with Western Australia as they're really looking to build their capacity and their capabilities prior to their studios coming online in 2026. What they're really looking to target is projects sort of between 20 and 40 million. So it hasn't been raised. I note what screen producers say, but I think we still have a vast opportunity to get a range of different types of productions from independent projects through to those tentpoles.
Yeah, go ahead. I've got a follow-up question, but go ahead.
Sure. I'll just briefly say, though, I think it's fair to say that AusFilm's members are not Australian producers. They are service providers and do a lot of work on international production. What we're talking about is productions that engage local producers and production companies who typically are not members of Ozfilm. So whilst I take Kate's point that this may not be something that's raised with them, it certainly impacts some of Australia's most prolific production companies who are known for making Australian content, who have actually had to do service work to keep our businesses sustainable. So it has a real impact not just on our business, but a number of really key Australian businesses.
And just as an industry association, that we represent 800 or so businesses, and this has been a constant theme from a number of the key businesses that this is an issue. So I want to reiterate what Tracey's saying.
Can I say, look, I understand that it kind of streamlining the location offset rather than it's clearer, it's more stable, it's more reliable. It's kind of then alongside the producer offset element, it makes sense to me. I think that's right. But I am interested in this threshold question because when the last time we had the fight over the producer offset, this is exactly the same problem that was raised, right?
Yes, in the PVV.
That the threshold was lifted too high and was going to cut out a number of independent, and particularly what happened was the impact on documentary films, which don't tend to have as bigger budgets because it's documentary as opposed to live drama. Is that the type of independent film, documentary films that you're saying are going to be impacted? I'm just processing this.
Well, I think we're saying that it could be a range of projects, possibly not documentary, more scripted, but we're talking about international budgets that are coming here. And it's what Tracey's saying, and a number of the production companies are saying, is that smaller production companies can work with smaller scale budgets more readily. There's a sort of a bigger scale exercise that goes on for international businesses located here to work on those international projects. So the benefit, what we're saying is that the location offset needs to benefit lots of different people, and there's no reason logically to cut out this piece. It's not saving the government hardly anything, I would have thought. It's a stimulus exercise. There's only upside from it. We don't understand, to your point earlier, why it was that it was lifted. It hasn't exactly been framed to us as to what the logical benefit was, other than possibly an arrangement, that would have gone on behind the scenes between Treasury and government. And we can't speak to that. That's something that the government needs to talk to. But so we're just saying that logically doesn't make sense.
I know the chair wants to wind me up. Sorry, Chair. If I could just have one final question, that's to Kate. Are Ozfilm opposed to the idea of keeping the threshold at the level that of the 15 million?
No, we're not. We're not absolutely not opposed to it. We're just very, very focused on getting it through. And so, that's our main concern.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I just think sometimes decisions are made in absence of other contexts, and I think given the screen local content quota issue now, I think the government should think about what else they could do. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Hanson. Thanks to all the witnesses for appearing. You go with our thanks. Thank you. The committee will now break for lunch, and we're slightly behind time, but we'll try and make some up. So we'll come back at 12:55 p.m. Thank you.